Alright guys, today we got a unique Warhammer 40K story. It's gonna be narrated by Frederick Sure. I hope you guys enjoy it. Get cozy.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists a fate that some consider an honor beyond measure, while others whisper of it as a curse wrapped in ceremony and sealed with sacred oils. To be interred within a dreadnought sarcophagus is to be granted a form of immortality, to continue serving the Emperor long after mortal flesh would have failed and turned to dust. But what happens when that immortality stretches across not decades, not centuries, but millennia upon millennia of service? What becomes of a consciousness forced to endure the slow erosion of everything that once made it human, everything that gave identity, meaning, and memory substance? Today, we delve into one of the most tragic and overlooked aspects of the Dreadnought's existence: the inevitable loss of memory, the gradual fading of identity, and the existential horror of waking in a body of blessed adamantium and sacred ceramite, only to discover that you can no longer remember who you were, where you came from, or why you continue to fight in wars whose beginning you cannot recall. The story of every Dreadnought's descent into amnesia is unique in its particulars, but universal in its fundamental arc. It begins with the brightest flame of consciousness, burning with the memories of a lifetime of service, of brotherhood forged in battle, of victories won and comrades lost. But with each cycle of sleep and awakening, with each century that passes in the blink of an eye or the eternity of a moment, that flame dims. Memories blur at the edges, faces lose their distinctness, names slip away like water through grasping fingers that no longer exist. The warrior who was once known by name, who was loved by brothers and feared by enemies, who had a history and an identity as solid as the armor they wore, slowly becomes a ghost haunting their own existence. They transform from person into weapon, from individual into instrument, until at last nothing remains but the machine, and a consciousness so fragmented that calling it human becomes an act of charity rather than accuracy. This is not a tale of glorious sacrifice, though the Imperium's propaganda would have you believe otherwise. This is not a story of heroes who transcend mortal limitations to serve eternally. This is the chronicle of a particular kind of horror, one that unfolds across centuries and millennia, so slowly that its victims often don't recognize what is happening until it has already consumed most of who they were. It is the horror of losing yourself piece by piece, of waking each time with less of yourself intact, of knowing with crystalline certainty that you are fading and being powerless to stop it. It is the horror of immortality without continuity, existence without experience, consciousness without self. The dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Astartes stand as walking monuments to sacrifice and duty, towering engines of war that embody both the Imperium's greatest technological achievements and its most profound cruelties. These mechanical titans stand between twice and thrice the height of a man, their forms varying from the venerable box-shaped Castaferum pattern to the more recent and controversial Redemptor design, but all sharing one common feature: within their armored shells rests the broken remnant of what was once a space marine warrior. They stride across battlefields with the inexorable purpose of living siege engines, their footsteps shaking the ground, their weapon systems capable of reducing fortifications to rubble and annihilating entire enemy formations in seconds. To witness a dreadnought in battle is to see war in its most terrifying and awe-inspiring form, a fusion of ancient warrior and blessed machine that represents 10,000 years of the Imperium's refusal to accept defeat or surrender any asset, no matter the cost. Each dreadnought is unique, bearing the scars and honors of centuries or millennia of service. Their chassis are works of art as much as instruments of war, covered in purity seals, whose vellum has yellowed with age, hung with honor chains whose links number in the hundreds, inscribed with litanies and battle prayers, in languages some so ancient that even the chapter's librarians must consult archives to translate them. Every dent and scratch tells a story. Every repaired plate marks a battle survived. Every enemy kill marking represents a foe vanquished by a warrior who should have died long ago. The tech marines who maintain these war machines treat them with reverence that borders on worship, for they are not merely maintaining equipment, but tending to the tombs of living heroes, preserving not just the mechanical function, but the spiritual essence of warriors whose deeds are legend. The weapons mounted on a Dreadnought's frame are terrifying in their destructive potential. Assault cannons that can fire hundreds of mass-reactive rounds per minute, each shell capable of exploding inside its target with devastating effect. Multi-melters that project beams of heat so intense they can vaporize armor plating and reduce flesh and bone to ash in milliseconds. Plasma cannons that hurl miniature suns at the enemy, each shot containing enough energy to level buildings. Missile launchers that can strike targets kilometers away with warheads designed to crack open bunkers and destroy armored vehicles. And in close combat, massive power fists that can crush battle tanks like empty cans. Lightning claws that can shred through ceramite armor as if it were parchment. Siege drills that can bore through fortress walls to create entry points for assault teams. But the most important component of any dreadnought is not its weapons or armor, impressive as they are. It is the sarcophagus at the machine's heart, that blessed and cursed container where the remains of a space marine warrior are preserved in a state that cannot properly be called life, but refuses to be called death. Within this armored womb, sustained by technologies that blur the boundaries between biological and mechanical, between natural and artificial, floats what little remains of a warrior who once walked battlefields in armor of their own, who once wielded bolter and chainsword with their own hands, who once breathed air unfiltered by machine spirits and felt the sun on skin that was their own. To understand the tragedy of a dreadnought losing their memory, we must first understand what they are, what they were, and most importantly, what the process of becoming a dreadnought does to consciousness, identity, and the human experience of time and self. We must understand that entombment is not simply a matter of transferring a consciousness from flesh to machine, but rather a fundamental transformation of what it means to be, to exist, to persist across time. The space marine who enters the sarcophagus is not the same being who emerges from it, even in those first moments of awakening, when memory still seems intact and identity still feels solid. Something essential changes in that transition, something that will have profound implications for everything that follows. Every dreadnought began their existence as a space marine, one of the Emperor's chosen warriors, already far removed from baseline humanity through decades of transformation that begins in boyhood and continues until the subject is barely recognizable as the human child they once were. The creation of a space marine is itself a process that borders on the miraculous and the horrific in equal measure. Young boys, typically selected between the ages of 10 and 14, undergo screening processes that test not just their physical capabilities, but their psychological resilience, their spiritual purity, and qualities that the chapter's experienced warriors recognize but cannot always articulate: a certain fire in the eyes, a particular way of facing fear, an ineffable something that marks them as worthy of the transformation to come. Those who pass these initial screenings begin the long and agonizing process of becoming Adeptus Astartes. The implantation of the 19 gene seed organs is spread across years, each organ carefully cultivated and then surgically implanted at the precise moment when the candidate's development makes it most likely to take hold successfully. The secondary heart that will give them redundancy in their circulatory system. The os modular that will cause their skeleton to grow and harden until their bones are virtually unbreakable. The biscopia that will trigger explosive muscle growth, granting them strength far beyond human norms. The hemastamen that will transform their blood into something more efficient, more resilient, capable of clotting almost instantly and carrying oxygen with far greater efficiency than baseline human blood. And there are others still organs that allow them to spit acid, to enter states of suspended animation, to process toxins that would kill normal humans, to see in complete darkness, to gain memories from consuming the flesh of the dead, to detect scents with predatory precision. Each implant comes with its own risks of rejection, its own potential for complications, and its own agonies as the body is forced to accept and integrate these foreign biological components. Many candidates do not survive the process. Those who do emerge transformed, no longer human in any conventional sense, but something that transcends humanity while still retaining its essential form. But the biological transformation is only part of what makes a Space Marine. Equally important is the psycho-conditioning, the hypnotherapy and subliminal indoctrination that reshapes the candidate's mind to match their transformed body. They are taught to know no fear, to view death in battle not as an ending to be avoided, but as the highest honor they can achieve. They are conditioned to value brotherhood and duty above all personal concerns, to place the chapter's needs before their own desires, to find their identity not in individual achievement, but in collective purpose. They learn the chapter's history and traditions, memorizing the deeds of legendary heroes who came before them, internalizing values and beliefs until they become fundamental to their sense of self. This conditioning is so deep, so thorough, that it persists even in the face of catastrophic injury and radical transformation. A Space Marine does not fear death because the very neural pathways that would generate such fear have been rewired through years of conditioning. A Space Marine does not question orders because centuries of tradition and psycho-indoctrination have made obedience to legitimate authority not merely expected, but psychologically comfortable. A Space Marine does not shirk from sacrifice because they have been taught at the most fundamental level that their life has value only insofar as it serves the Emperor and the Imperium, that to die in that service is to achieve the purpose for which they were created. These warriors know no fear in its conventional sense. They understand danger, can calculate risk, will make tactical decisions based on probability of survival. But the gut level, instinctive terror that causes normal humans to flee or freeze in the face of overwhelming threat has been carefully excised from their psychological makeup. They possess strength that can crush steel with their bare hands, enough force in a single punch to cave in an armored vehicle's hull. They are conditioned to view death in battle as the highest honor they can achieve, the culmination of a life dedicated to service and sacrifice. They are psychologically and physiologically crafted for war, their minds fortified against horrors that would shatter mortal men, their bodies capable of enduring wounds that would kill ordinary humans a dozen times. Over a Space Marine can lose an arm and continue fighting, can have his chest punctured and his lung collapsed and still maintain combat effectiveness, can suffer injuries that would send normal soldiers into shock and death, yet remain functional for hours or even days. Yet even Space Marines can fall. Even these superhuman warriors, these pinnacles of humanity's genetic and spiritual potential, can suffer injuries so catastrophic that not even their enhanced biology can save them. A plasma weapon's direct hit that burns through armor and the flesh beneath, reducing organs to charred ruin. An Orc Warchief's power claw that tears through ceramite and the body within, severing spine and crushing organs in a single terrible blow. An explosion that catches a Marine in the open, the overpressure collapsing their torso despite the protection of their power armor. A Chaos Champion's demon weapon that inflicts wounds that defy the normal rules of injury, damage that spreads through the body like corruption through flesh, killing in ways that enhanced biology cannot counter. When a Space Marine suffers wounds that destroy their body but leave their mind intact, when their primary heart is destroyed and their secondary heart cannot compensate for the damage to surrounding organs, when their preomnal fails and toxins flood their system faster than even their enhanced biology can process, when their Laraman's organ cannot clot wounds that are simply too massive, when death stands moments away but the spirit still burns with the will to serve, when their brothers look upon them and see a warrior who still has so much to offer but a body that can no longer deliver it, the chapter faces a choice pregnant with implications, both practical and philosophical. They can allow their brother to die with honor, his gene seed harvested for the next generation, his name added to the rolls of the fallen, his deeds remembered in the chapter's halls of heroes. Or they can offer him what they call the highest honor entombment within a Dreadnought chassis, a second life as a living weapon, a chance to continue serving the Emperor for centuries or even millennia to come. Most chapters reserve this honor for their greatest heroes, for captains and champions, for veterans whose tactical knowledge and combat experience are deemed too valuable to lose. But the word honor carries weight that few outside the Adeptus Astartes truly understand. for it comes with a price that cannot be measured in blood or glory. The process of entombment is as much ritual as it is surgery, a sacred and profane procedure that exists at the intersection of the Mechanicus's technological prowess and the Adeptus Astartes' spiritual traditions. It begins in the aftermath of catastrophic injury, in those crucial minutes when a space marine's enhanced biology battles against wounds that would kill even one of the Emperor's finest. The apothecaries, those space marines who combine medical knowledge with the chapter's traditions, make their assessments with practiced speed. They can tell at a glance which wounds are survivable with conventional treatment and which have crossed that invisible threshold beyond which no amount of surgery or augmentation can restore the warrior to functional status. They check neural responses, assess brain activity, determine whether the mind remains intact within a body that is dying despite all its enhancements. If the apothecaries determine that a fallen brother cannot be saved through conventional means, if the injuries are so severe that recovery is impossible but death has not yet claimed the warrior's consciousness, a decision must be made with agonizing speed. The window between life and death narrows with each passing second, measured in heartbeats that grow fainter and breaths that become more labored. There is no time for extensive deliberation, no opportunity for lengthy consultation with chapter leadership. The decision must be made here, now, in the blood-soaked chaos of the battlefield or the hurried activity of the field hospital. The criteria for who receives this dubious honor vary by chapter and by circumstance, but certain principles are nearly universal across the Adeptus Astartes. The warrior must have distinguished themselves through exceptional service. Typically, this means officers, champions, veterans with centuries of combat experience, those whose tactical knowledge and combat wisdom are deemed too valuable to lose. The warrior must have suffered injuries that are catastrophic but have left the brain and central nervous system largely intact. A marine whose head has been destroyed cannot be saved, no matter how great their previous achievements. The warrior must be recoverable. There is no point making the decision if the dying marine cannot be transported to a fortress monastery equipped to perform the entombment procedure before death claims them completely. If these criteria are met, if the chapter's leadership agrees that the warrior is worthy of this fate and that practical considerations allow for it, the preparations begin immediately. In the field, this means stabilizing the dying marine as much as possible, using every tool at the apothecary's disposal to keep the brain oxygenated and prevent catastrophic organ failure while the warrior is transported. Stasis fields may be employed, slowing the dying marine's biological processes to buy precious hours. Potent drugs that would kill a normal human are administered in doses that would seem reckless, all aimed at the single goal of preserving consciousness until proper facilities can be reached. The actual journey to the fortress monastery becomes a race against time. Thunderhawk gunships scream through atmospheres at speeds that test their structural integrity. Strike cruisers engage their warp drives for jumps that would normally require more extensive preparation, accepting greater risks in exchange for faster transit. And always, the apothecaries maintain their vigil over the dying marine, monitoring vital signs that grow steadily weaker, making constant adjustments to keep the spark of consciousness burning just a little longer, refusing to accept the defeat that biology insists is inevitable. When the dying space marine finally reaches the fortress monastery, they are transported immediately to the deepest sanctums, to chambers that exist at the intersection of surgical theatre, sacred temple, and workshop of the Mechanicus. Here, tech marines and apothecaries work in concert under the watchful gaze of chaplains, who recite prayers to the machine god and the emperor in equal measure. Their words a constant drone that sanctifies the profane work about to commence. The chamber is prepared with meticulous care, every instrument blessed, every servo skull loaded with the appropriate prayers, every candle lit in the proper sequence. The Dreadnought sarcophagus that will become the warrior's new body has already been prepared, its systems checked and rechecked, its machine spirit placated through proper rituals, its internal life support mechanisms calibrated to the specific physiology of the marine who will soon inhabit it. These sarcophagi are ancient and precious, often dating back millennia, maintained across centuries with a care that borders on obsession. Each one is unique, bearing its own history, its own quirks and preferences, its own machine spirit that must be respected and honored if it is to accept a new occupant successfully. What follows is a procedure that would be called an abomination by those outside the Imperium, a grotesque marriage of flesh and machine that pushes the boundaries of what the human form can endure even after being enhanced beyond baseline humanity's limitations. The tech marines and apothecaries work with practiced precision honed over centuries of performing these dark miracles, their movements economical and sure despite the magnitude of what they are attempting. They are not merely conducting surgery but performing a ritual transformation, turning warrior into weapon, flesh into machine, man into monument. The Space Marine's broken body is carefully dismantled in a procedure that is simultaneously surgical operation and dissection and sacred rite. Power armor is removed with reverent care, each piece catalogued and stored for preservation as a relic. The warrior's own flesh is assessed and categorized: what can be saved, what must be removed, what serves no purpose but carries symbolic or spiritual significance. Each chapter makes different decisions about how much of the original body to preserve. Some maintain extensive portions of the torso, keeping organs that no longer serve biological functions but represent connections to the Marine's original form. Others strip away everything except what is absolutely necessary for consciousness to persist, believing that clinging to useless flesh dishonors the transformation that is occurring. The brain must remain intact. Of course, this is the fundamental component around which everything else is built. The brain is the seat of consciousness, the repository of memories and personality, the irreducible core of what makes this particular Space Marine who they are. Along with the brain, portions of the central nervous system must be preserved enough neural tissue to allow the brain to interface with the mechanical systems that will replace the warrior's destroyed body. Beyond this absolute minimum, each chapter and each individual case involves different decisions about what else to keep. Some chapters preserve the primary heart, even though artificial systems will handle all actual circulatory functions, because the Space Marine's enhanced heart represents a crucial component of their transformation from baseline humanity. Others maintain portions of the digestive system, despite the fact that nutrient feeds will handle all actual sustenance, viewing these organs as spiritually important, even when they are biologically superfluous. The chapter's traditions, the tech marine's preferences, the specific nature of the injuries, and sometimes the wishes of the warrior themselves all influence these decisions about what flesh remains and what is replaced by blessed steel. The torso is often kept as much as possible, providing both an anchor for the crucial biological systems and a physical connection to the warrior's original form. But limbs, if they remain at all after the injuries that necessitated entombment, are purely vestigial. Arms that can no longer move, hands that can no longer grasp, fingers that can no longer feel, these remnants serve no function, except as reminders of what once was, and many chapters choose to remove them entirely rather than preserve useless appendages. Legs, if they survived the initial injuries, are similarly superfluous. The Dreadnought will walk on mechanical limbs of far greater strength and stability than any biological legs could provide. What remains: the brain, the essential nervous system components, the portions of torso and organs deemed worthy of preservation, is carefully encased within the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus itself is a marvel of lost technology, its design dating back to the Great Crusade and perhaps even earlier, incorporating principles that the Mechanicus's tech priests can maintain but no longer fully understand how to recreate from scratch. Within its armored shell, life support systems maintain the organic components in a state that defies easy categorization, not quite alive in the conventional sense, but not dead either, existing in some liminal space between being and non-being. Nutrient feeds deliver sustenance directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system entirely. The warrior will never taste food again, never experience the satisfaction of hunger sated or thirst quenched, never know the simple pleasure of a meal shared with battle brothers after a successful campaign. Waste products are removed through automated systems, the indignity of such biological necessities handled by machines without consciousness or judgment, reduced to the mechanical equivalent of respiration, something that simply happens without thought or awareness. Temperature is regulated. Atmospheric composition is controlled. Every variable that might affect the preserved organic components is monitored and adjusted with precision that borders on the obsessive. But the most crucial components of the sarcophagus are the neural interfaces, those delicate and sophisticated systems that will allow thought to become action, will to become movement, consciousness to become weapon. These interfaces are blessed with unguents and inscribed with prayers in High Gothic and binary alike. Every connection between flesh and machine sanctified through proper ritual. The neural interfaces are carefully grafted onto the surviving nervous system, creating connections that will allow the warrior's thoughts to control the Dreadnought's massive form, with something approaching the same facility they once controlled their original body. These connections are not simple electrical relays, but complex interfaces that translate human neural signals into machine commands, while simultaneously converting machine sensory input into neural impulses the brain can interpret. The technology required for this translation is ancient and poorly understood, maintained through ritual and tradition as much as through actual comprehension of underlying principles. Tech priests perform the required ceremonies with perfect precision, following patterns laid down millennia ago, trusting that if every step is performed correctly, the machine spirit will accept its new occupant and the warrior will wake to their second life. The surgery takes hours or sometimes days, depending on the extent of the injuries and the complexity of the integration required. Throughout this extended procedure, the chaplains maintain their vigil, their voices never ceasing in their recitation of prayers and litanies. They pray to the Emperor for the warrior's soul, to the Omnissiah for the success of the technical work, to the Primarch whose gene seed flows in the Marine's veins, to the machine spirit of the sarcophagus, that it might accept its new occupant kindly. Their prayers create a constant background, a spiritual white noise that sanctifies every cut, every connection, every transformation of flesh into something that is no longer quite flesh. When the surgery is finally complete, when every connection has been made and every system has been tested and retested, when the tech marines are satisfied that the work has been done properly and the chaplains are convinced that all necessary spiritual protections are in place, comes the moment that defines everything that follows. The life support systems are fully activated. Power floods through the sarcophagus. The neural interfaces come online, and deep within the armored shell, in a space barely larger than a coffin, consciousness returns to a warrior who died but has been denied death, who ended but has been forced to begin again, who lost everything familiar and is about to discover what they have gained in exchange. The first awakening after entombment is, by all accounts, documented across 10,000 years of the Imperium's history, and from warriors of 100 different chapters, universally described as the most difficult, most disorienting, and most traumatic moment in a Dreadnought's entire existence. Nothing, not the agony of the injuries that necessitated entombment, not the centuries of warfare that preceded those injuries, not even the psychological conditioning and enhancement surgeries that transformed a boy into a space marine, can adequately prepare a warrior for this moment of rebirth into a form that defies every instinct about what it means to have a body, to exist in space, to interact with the physical world. The warrior who went into surgery as a body, however broken and damaged, emerges from it as something fundamentally, profoundly different, at every conceivable level. The transition is not gradual but instantaneous. One moment there is nothing but darkness and the absence of sensation. The next moment there is awareness flooding back with overwhelming intensity. But the awareness returns to a form that feels alien, wrong, impossible. They attempt to move limbs that no longer exist, reaching for weapons they can no longer hold, trying to stand on legs that were removed during the surgery. The neural signals fire, pathways laid down across decades of life, attempting to activate muscles that are no longer there, and the resulting sensation is one of profound disconnect between intention and result. They try to speak, forming words in a mouth that persists only as memory, using vocal cords that were part of flesh long since removed. and hear instead a mechanical approximation of their voice. The sound that emerges is filtered through voxcasters and speakers, processed through machine systems that translate neural impulses into audio output. It sounds like them, perhaps in the most basic aspects of tone and cadence, but it lacks the subtle variations, the warmth, the purely human qualities that once made their voice unique and recognizable. It is their voice, as heard through static and mechanical distortion, as if they were speaking from inside a metal drum or transmitting across a bad Vox channel. Some dreadnoughts describe the horror of hearing this mechanical voice for the first time and not recognizing it as their own, experiencing a moment of cognitive dissonance where they wonder who is speaking before realizing that the alien sound is emanating from themselves. They attempt to breathe, that most fundamental and automatic of biological functions, something so basic that conscious thought is never required, and feel only the steady, mechanical rhythm of life support systems doing the work that lungs once performed. There is no sensation of air flowing through nostrils, no feeling of chest expanding and contracting, no awareness of the subtle changes in oxygen levels that normally provide unconscious feedback about whether one is breathing properly. Instead, there is simply the knowledge provided by machine systems reporting on their own function, that appropriate gas exchange is occurring, that oxygen is being delivered to preserved brain tissue at optimal levels, that carbon dioxide is being removed at appropriate rates. It is breathing reduced to pure utility, stripped of every qualitative aspect that once made it an experience rather than merely a process. The sensory input is perhaps the most disorienting aspect of this new existence. Vision returns, but it is not seeing in any conventional sense. Instead of eyes that move within skull, tracking motion and focusing on objects through the subtle dance of muscles and lenses refined by millions of years of evolution, there are optical sensors that present visual information in ways that feel simultaneously more and less than natural sight. The Dreadnought can see across spectrums invisible to human eyes, infrared signatures that reveal heat sources, ultraviolet patterns that emerge from surfaces invisible to baseline vision, electromagnetic fields that create ghostly outlines around powered equipment. They can zoom their vision to magnify distant targets or shrink their field of view to examine fine details. They can overlay tactical information directly onto their visual field, seeing threat assessments and targeting solutions as naturally as they once saw colors and shapes. But this enhanced vision comes at a cost measured in lost nuance and human experience. They no longer see with the depth and richness that organic eyes provided. The subtle play of light on surfaces, the infinite variation in color tones, the way shadows deepen and shift with the movement of the sun, these aesthetic experiences are flattened, reduced to data points that convey information without beauty. They cannot close their eyes, cannot blink away tears they no longer produce, cannot experience the simple pleasure of sight recovered after being shut in darkness. Their eyes, such as they are, never rest, never cease their endless cataloguing and analysis of the environment. It is exhausting in ways that are difficult to articulate, a constant barrage of sensory input that can never be simply turned off or ignored through the simple expedient of closing one's eyes. Hearing becomes similarly transformed. The Dreadnought no longer hears through ears, but through audio receivers that detect vibrations across a wider range of frequencies than baseline human hearing could ever access. They can hear the subsonic rumble of distant artillery, the ultrasonic pings of sonar systems, the electromagnetic hash of radio communications that would be completely inaudible to organic ears. They can filter and process sounds with precision that allows them to pick out individual conversations from a crowd or isolate the specific mechanical signature of an enemy vehicle from kilometers away. The audio inputs are crisp and clear, free from the distortions that affect organic hearing, capable of maintaining perfect fidelity even in acoustic environments that would deafen normal humans. Yet they have lost something essential in this transformation. They can no longer hear music as music, only as patterns of organized sound waves. The emotional resonance of a battle hymn, the stirring power of a chapter's anthem, the way certain sounds could lift spirits or instill calm, these qualitative aspects of auditory experience are lost or greatly diminished. They hear the notes, but not the music. receive the audio input, but cannot fully process it as an aesthetic or emotional experience. They are deaf to the subtle emotional communications that exist in the tone and timbre of voices, the micro-expressions in sound that reveal fear or determination, joy or sorrow, truth or deception. They hear words with perfect clarity, but miss the meaning that exists between and beneath the words themselves. Touch, perhaps the most fundamental of senses, the one that confirms our physical existence and our connection to the world around us, is transformed into something alien and remote. The Dreadnought does not feel in any conventional sense. When their massive power fist closes around an object, they receive data about grip pressure and resistance, about the object's hardness and density, about the force being applied and the structural integrity of what is being held. But they do not feel texture, cannot sense whether the surface is rough or smooth, hot or cold, wet or dry. These qualitative aspects of touch that provide so much information and pleasure in organic life are simply absent, replaced by quantitative data that conveys information without sensation. When they walk, placing each massive foot on the ground with earth-shaking force, they know they are making contact with a surface, can measure the firmness of that surface, and adjust their weight distribution accordingly. But they do not feel the ground beneath their feet in the way they once did, cannot sense through the subtle feedback of nerves whether they are standing on grass or stone, sand or metal. They navigate through the world as ghosts might, present but not truly part of it, moving through space without being fully connected to it in the intimate way that embodied existence requires. Some Dreadnoughts describe this first awakening as akin to drowning, to being submerged in cold water that presses in from all sides, restricting movement and making every action require conscious effort that once came naturally. The panic that ensues is primal and overwhelming, bypassing even the fear conditioning that Space Marines receive during their transformation. It is not fear in the tactical sense. The Dreadnought is not afraid of enemies or danger. It is existential panic, the terror of discovering that you have become something incomprehensible, that the basic assumptions about existence and embodiment have been fundamentally violated, that you persist but in a form that seems impossible and wrong at every level of awareness. Others speak of a profound disorientation that makes the physical vertigo of combat seem trivial by comparison. They know they exist, can think and form intentions, but cannot reconcile their sense of self with the physical reality of what they have become. There is a disconnect between the body schema, the mental map that every conscious being maintains of their physical form, and the actual configuration of the machine they now inhabit. The brain continues to generate phantom sensations of the missing body, creating illusions of pain or pressure or movement in limbs that no longer exist. They experience itches they cannot scratch, pains they cannot soothe, sensations of position and movement that conflict with the actual configuration of their mechanical form. This phantom body phenomenon persists for most Dreadnoughts throughout their entire existence, never fully resolving, always creating a subtle but constant background of dissonance between what the brain insists should be there and what actually exists. Some describe it as a form of madness, a persistent delusion that coexists with perfect awareness that it is a delusion. They know their human hands are gone, can consciously acknowledge this fact, yet still experience vivid sensations of fingers curling and uncurling, of grasping and releasing, of performing fine manipulations that are now physically impossible. The psychological strain of maintaining dual awareness, the intellectual knowledge of what one has become, and the persistent sensory illusion of what one once was, creates a form of cognitive burden that never fully lifts. No amount of Space Marine conditioning can fully suppress this first awakening's trauma, the psychological fortification that allows them to face xenos, horrors, and chaos abominations without flinching, that enables them to endure physical tortures that would break normal humans within seconds, that permits them to witness the deaths of brothers and continue fighting without pause. None of this conditioning addresses the fundamental existential horror of waking up as something that should not exist, that violates every instinct about the relationship between mind and body, consciousness and form. But the tech marines and apothecaries who oversee this awakening are prepared for the reaction. They have seen it countless times before, across centuries of performing these transformations. They understand that every dreadnought must pass through this crucible of disorientation and panic before they can begin to function in their new form. They guide the newly entombed warrior through the process with practiced patience, their voices calm and steady as they provide instructions and reassurance. They help the dreadnought learn to interpret the new sensory inputs, to translate the data streams into actionable information, to begin building new neural pathways that can bridge the gap between organic thought and mechanical action. Simple movements come first, rotating the torso slowly through 90 degrees, learning to feel the weight distribution and compensate for the different center of gravity. Lifting an arm, watching as the massive limb responds to intention, noting the slight delay between thought and action as neural signals traverse interfaces and activate hydraulic systems. Taking a single step, experiencing the ground-shaking impact, and learning to modulate the force to achieve stable movement rather than catastrophic stomping. These actions that once required no thought, that were as natural as breathing, now demand intense concentration and conscious control. Over days and weeks, through endless repetition and practice, the dreadnought learns to inhabit their new form with something approaching facility. The neural pathways strengthen, the translation between thought and mechanical action becomes more efficient, the sensory inputs begin to make intuitive sense rather than requiring conscious interpretation. They learn to walk again with growing confidence, to turn and pivot without losing balance, to manipulate objects with their massive manipulator arms despite the complete absence of tactile feedback. They learn to aim their weapons, not through sight, down a barrel as they once did, but through targeting reticules projected directly into their consciousness, through data streams that show trajectory and impact probability with mathematical precision. They learn to perceive the world through their optical sensors, gradually building new associations that allow them to process the transformed visual input in ways that approximate normal sight. They learn to interpret the audio feeds, to filter the important communications from the background noise, to understand spoken language despite the mechanical quality of how they hear it. They learn to navigate using the internal gyroscopes and positional sensors that tell them where they are in space without requiring the feedback from inner ears that no longer exist. And they learn about the sleep, about the state they will enter between periods of active service, about the peculiar non-existence that will dominate most of their future existence. This is perhaps the most difficult concept for the newly awakened dreadnought to grasp, that they will not remain conscious between battles, that their existence will become fragmented and discontinuous, that they will sleep for periods measured in decades or centuries, waking only when the chapter has need of their service. The thought creates anxiety that borders on existential terror for many newly entombed warriors. They have just endured the agony of losing their original body, and learning to inhabit this mechanical form, have fought through the disorientation and panic to achieve some measure of adaptation, and now they learn that they will be forced into unconsciousness for periods so long that the world will change around them while they sleep, that brothers they know will age and die in what seems to them like moments, that they will become unstuck from the normal flow of time that gives existence its structure and meaning. Between battles, dreadnoughts are not kept active for practical reasons that are simultaneously biological, psychological, and logistical. The strain on their organic components is immense. The preserved brain tissue and nervous system are working far harder than they were designed to work, processing information and generating signals at rates far beyond what normal neural function requires. Keeping a dreadnought conscious for extended periods accelerates the biological degradation that will eventually claim all of them, burning through the finite lifespan of irreplaceable neurons at an unsustainable rate. The psychological burden is equally significant. The constant sensory input, the never-ending requirement to interpret machine signals as human experience, the persistent dissonance between phantom body and actual form, all of this creates mental fatigue that can lead to breakdowns if not periodically relieved through unconsciousness. And from a purely practical standpoint, maintaining an active dreadnought requires resources power for the sarcophagus systems, nutrient feeds for the organic components, oversight from tech marines to ensure everything functions properly, physical space within the fortress monastery that might be needed for other purposes. It is more efficient in every measurable way to place the Dreadnought in suspended animation between periods when their combat capabilities are required, preserving both the warrior and the chapter's resources for when they will actually be needed. To the Dreadnought, this sleep is not restful in any sense that organic beings would understand. It is not the natural sleep of mortals where dreams carry the mind to distant places and time passes with gentle inevitability, where consciousness fades through stages and gradually returns, where rest actually occurs and the sleeper wakes refreshed and recovered. It is instead a void, an absence so complete that when consciousness returns, the Dreadnought often cannot be certain they existed at all during that time, cannot determine whether a day has passed or a century, cannot remember anything that would confirm continuous existence, rather than being spontaneously created anew each time they wake. There are no dreams in this sleep, or if there are, they are not remembered upon waking. There is no sense of time passing, no awareness, even at a subconscious level, that could mark the passage of seconds into minutes, hours into days, days into years. The last conscious moment before sleep and the first conscious moment of awakening seem to follow each other immediately, with nothing in between, as if someone had simply turned off and then back on a switch, controlling consciousness. A Dreadnought might go to sleep after a battle and wake what seems like moments later to discover that 70 years have passed, that the chapter master who gave the order for sleep has been dead for decades, that an entire generation of Space Marines has been recruited and trained and sent to war in what felt like the blink of an eye. This temporal discontinuity is deeply destabilizing in ways that are difficult for beings with continuous consciousness to fully comprehend. Imagine trying to maintain any sense of stable identity, any coherent narrative of self, when your existence is fragmented into discrete episodes, separated by gulfs of non-being that could span hours or centuries with equal likelihood. Imagine waking repeatedly to find that the world has changed around you while you were absent, that people you knew are gone, that events have occurred that everyone references casually, but that you have no memory of because you were not present to experience them. Without external references, without the natural cycles of day and night that regulate biological rhythms, without the body's internal clocks that normally provide intuitive sense of time's passage, the Dreadnought exists in a temporal limbo where past, present, and future blur into an indistinct continuity, or perhaps more accurately, into discontinuous fragments that cannot be properly ordered or understood as part of a coherent timeline. They lose the ability to judge how long they have been serving, how many battles they have fought, how much time has passed since their entombment. They might wake thinking they have been a Dreadnought for a few decades, only to be told it has been 3 centuries. Or they might feel certain that several hundred years have passed when in reality it has been only 50. This is where the first seeds of memory loss take root, in this fundamental disconnect between consciousness and the normal flow of time. The human brain, even the enhanced brain of a Space Marine with its augmented cognitive capabilities and eidetic memory training, is not designed to function in the manner demanded by Dreadnought existence. Memory formation and maintenance depend on continuous experience, on the constant reinforcement of neural pathways through regular activation, on the contextual anchors that tie experiences to time and place. We remember not just through raw data storage, but through association and connection, through the web of relationships between memories that allows us to place events in sequence and understand their significance. The first memories to fade are often the most recent ones, those formed after entombment. A Dreadnought awakens to fight a battle, serves with distinction, and is returned to sleep. When they wake again, whether days or decades later, they struggle to recall the specifics of that previous engagement. They remember that they fought. They remember that there was an enemy, but the details slip away like water through grasping fingers. The faces of the battle brothers who fought alongside them become indistinct. The name of the world they defended refuses to surface. The specific nature of the enemy, whether Orc or Tyrannid, Chaos, Marine, or Eldar, becomes uncertain. At first, these gaps are small, easily explained away, as the natural result of too many battles across too many years. But they grow larger with each awakening, each sleep, each cycle of consciousness suspended and then restored. The organic brain, even one enhanced by gene seed modifications, has physical limitations. Neurons can only fire so many times before they begin to degrade. Synaptic connections can only be maintained for so long without the biological processes that naturally refresh and strengthen them. The life support systems of a Dreadnought sarcophagus can keep brain tissue alive indefinitely, but they cannot prevent the slow accumulation of cellular damage that centuries of existence inevitably bring. Dead neurons are not replaced. Damaged synapses are not repaired. The brain that awakens after 500 years of intermittent consciousness is not the same brain that was first entombed. It has changed, adapted, and most crucially, it has lost pieces of itself that can never be recovered. Tech marines attempt to compensate for this biological degradation through technological means. The neural interfaces that connect brain to machine are designed to supplement failing organic memory with machine storage. Every battle, every tactical decision, every significant event is recorded by the Dreadnought systems and stored in databanks that theoretically have unlimited capacity. In theory, a Dreadnought should be able to access these records at will, replaying battles from centuries past with perfect clarity, recalling conversations and commands with mechanical precision. But machine memory is not human memory. It lacks the emotional context, the sensory richness, the deeply personal significance that makes memories more than mere data. A Dreadnought can access a recording of a battle fought 3 centuries ago and see, through objective sensors, every moment of that engagement. They can watch themselves advancing through enemy lines, firing their weapons, crushing foes beneath their massive feet. But watching a recording is not the same as remembering. It feels external, disconnected, like watching a stranger who happens to be wearing their name. The emotional content is absent the fury that drove them forward, the brotherhood they felt with those fighting alongside them, the satisfaction of victory, or the pain of losses suffered. Without these emotional anchors, the recordings become meaningless compilations of tactical data rather than personal experiences that shape identity and inform future actions. As the centuries accumulate, as sleep cycles multiply, and the organic brain continues its slow deterioration, the memory loss progresses from inconvenient to profound. The Dreadnought begins to lose not just recent memories, but older ones as well, those formed before entombment, when they still walked as flesh and blood. The faces of squad mates from their early service blur and fade. The specific circumstances of the battles that earned them their ranks and honors become uncertain. Details that once seemed eternal, the sound of their original voice, the feeling of wind on skin, the taste of victory wine after a successful campaign, slip away into the void of forgotten experience. But perhaps most horrifying is when a Dreadnought begins to lose the memories that define their very identity. Names become difficult to recall. Not the names of others, but their own name. The designation they carried when they were flesh. They know they are a Dreadnought. They know they serve a chapter. They know they fight for the Emperor. But who they were before entombment, what deeds earned them this dubious honor, what drove them to accept this fate, these fundamental truths become shadows and speculation rather than certain knowledge. They become strangers to themselves, consciousness without clear identity, warriors without personal history, weapons that can think but can no longer remember why they chose to continue fighting. The psychological impact of this progressive amnesia cannot be overstated. Imagine waking from dreamless sleep to find yourself in a body you do not recognize, surrounded by faces you do not know, fighting in a war whose beginning you cannot recall. Imagine being told that you are a hero of your chapter, that you have served with distinction for hundreds of years, that your deeds are recorded in rolls of honor that bear your name. Yet you cannot remember any of it. You cannot feel the truth of these statements in your bones. They are facts presented to you by others, accepted on faith rather than known through experience. You are asked to be someone you cannot remember being, to live up to a legend that feels like it belongs to someone else entirely. Some Dreadnoughts, when confronted with these memory losses, withdraw into themselves. They become silent and uncommunicative, responding to orders and performing their tactical functions, but offering nothing beyond mechanical compliance. Their personalities, once vibrant and distinct, fade into a flat uniformity that makes them difficult to distinguish from one another, except by the markings on their chassis. They become exactly what their physical form suggests: machines that happen to contain some small fragment of life, weapons that can follow orders, but have lost the capacity for anything approaching genuine interaction. Others respond differently, fighting against the amnesia with desperate determination. They demand to be shown the records of their service, reading and rereading battle reports, in hopes that something will trigger genuine recollection. They request audiences with the chapter's oldest members, hoping that conversations about shared experiences will unlock memories that otherwise remain beyond reach. They create rituals and routines, anchoring themselves to repetitive actions in the hope that through sheer force of will, they can maintain some connection to continuous existence. These dreadnoughts often develop peculiar habits, insisting on specific words before battle, demanding to be positioned in particular locations within the fortress monastery, refusing to sleep until certain ceremonies have been performed. To outsiders, these behaviors might seem like madness or obsession, but they serve a crucial purpose for the dreadnought. They are attempts to create stability in an existence defined by discontinuity, to impose order on the chaos of a fragmenting consciousness. The chapters themselves vary widely in how they respond to these struggles. Some chapters view memory loss as inevitable and even acceptable, focusing on preserving the dreadnought's tactical capabilities rather than their personal identity. As long as the Ancient can still fight, still advise on strategy, still serve the Emperor through violence and war, their inability to remember their past life is considered a minor inconvenience rather than a genuine tragedy. These chapters maintain extensive records of each dreadnought's service, providing briefings before each awakening to orient the Ancient and ensure they understand their role and purpose. But there is a coldness to this approach, a utilitarian efficiency that treats the dreadnought as a resource to be managed, rather than a brother to be honored. Other chapters take a more compassionate approach, recognizing that the preservation of identity and memory is as important as the preservation of tactical function. They assign specific battle brothers to serve as companions and guides to each dreadnought, individuals who memorize the Ancient's history and can provide personal context rather than mere tactical briefings. They hold ceremonies of remembrance before each awakening, reciting the dreadnought's deeds and speaking the names of fallen comrades in hopes of triggering genuine recollection. Some chapters go so far as to maintain chambers where the dreadnought's personal effects from before entombment are preserved: worn armor, favored weapons, personal journals. Anything that might serve as a physical connection to the past, they are losing. The Blood Angels chapter is particularly noted for their treatment of dreadnoughts, perhaps because their own gene seed carries its own curse of memory and madness. Blood Angels dreadnoughts are awakened more frequently than those of other chapters, kept more closely involved in the ongoing life of the chapter, rather than being sealed away for decades at a time. This approach has its advantages, providing more continuity of experience and reducing the temporal disorientation that contributes to memory loss. But it also means the dreadnought's organic components deteriorate more quickly, burning bright rather than smoldering slowly across millennia. The Blood Angels have made their choice better, a shorter service with memory and identity intact than an eternity of confused half-existence. The Space Wolves take a different approach entirely, one befitting their more feral nature and their skepticism of excessive technological augmentation. Space Wolves dreadnoughts are treated as honored ancestors rather than mere weapons, and the chapter goes to great lengths to preserve not just their tactical knowledge, but their personalities and personal histories. The Space Wolves maintain oral traditions, with skalds and storytellers who can recite the sagas of each ancient in loving detail. Before each awakening, these sagas are performed, surrounding the dreadnought with the stories of their life as they return to consciousness. This approach has produced some of the most stable and long-lived dreadnoughts in the Imperium, warriors who retain strong connections to their identity even after millennia of service. Bjorn the Fell-Handed stands as the oldest dreadnought in the Imperium, having served the Space Wolves for over 10,000 years since walking alongside Lemon Russ himself during the Great Crusade. Bjorn's example provides crucial insights into both the possibilities and limitations of long-term Dreadnought consciousness. By all accounts, Bjorn retains remarkable clarity for one of his age, able to recall events from the heresy with detail and precision that staggers even the most learned librarians. Yet even Bjorn is not immune to the effects of time and memory loss. He sleeps for longer periods now, awakening only for the most crucial moments when his ancient wisdom is desperately needed. Between these awakenings, centuries can pass, and when he wakes, he requires time to orient himself, to understand what year it is, what threats face the Imperium, who among his chapter's leadership still lives, and who has passed into legend. Bjorn himself has spoken of the experience of waking after extended sleep, describing it as emerging from a fog so thick that for several moments he cannot be certain whether he is Bjorn the Fell-Handed or simply a collection of memories that once belonged to someone by that name. He describes phantom sensations of a body he no longer possesses, the feeling of fingers that were lost 10 millennia ago, the weight of armor he has not worn since the Siege of Terror. He speaks of needing to be reminded of where he is and when he is, of requiring his brothers to orient him, not just spatially, but temporally, anchoring him to a present that feels increasingly alien with each awakening. Even with all the Space Wolves' efforts to preserve his identity and memory, even with the constant reinforcement of his saga and his place in the chapter's history, Bjorn struggles against the erosion that time inevitably brings. If Bjorn, who benefits from the Space Wolves' extensive support and their commitment to preserving his identity, still struggles with memory and continuity, imagine the fate of dreadnoughts in chapters less attentive to such concerns. Consider the ancient who awakens in a fortress monastery they do not recognize because it has been rebuilt twice since they last walked its halls. Consider the dreadnought who is addressed by brothers bearing names and faces they have never seen, who speak of campaigns and victories the ancient has no memory of, who reference chapter traditions that were established while the ancient slept. Consider the horror of being told that you fought in a particular battle, that you performed acts of heroism that saved your chapter from destruction, and having absolutely no recollection of any of it. It is there in the records. Your fellow battle brothers can describe your actions in detail, but to you, it might as well have happened to someone else entirely. This disconnect between recorded history and personal experience creates a profound existential crisis for many dreadnoughts. They become walking archives of their own lives, able to access detailed accounts of everything they have done, yet unable to connect those accounts to any sense of having actually done them. They read about themselves in the third person, studying their own deeds with the detachment of a scholar examining historical texts. The person described in those records might share their name and their physical form, but the emotional and psychological connection has been severed. They are ghosts haunting their own history, present but not truly there, existing but not truly living. The technical aspects of this memory degradation have been studied extensively by tech marines and biologists adepts, though their conclusions offer little hope for prevention or reversal. The problem is multifaceted, involving both biological and technological factors that compound each other over time. The organic brain tissue, kept alive through artificial means, suffers from what might be called use decay. The simple fact that neurons have a finite lifespan and a limited number of times they can fire before cellular damage accumulates beyond the body's ability to repair. In a normal human, or even a space marine with their enhanced biology, dead or damaged neurons are continuously replaced or bypassed through the brain's natural plasticity. But in the isolated, artificially maintained environment of a dreadnought sarcophagus, these natural repair processes are greatly impaired. The brain tissue has no access to the full suite of hormones and chemical signals that normally regulate neurological health. The blood supply, while maintained artificially, lacks the cellular components that naturally clear away dead cells and stimulate regeneration. The isolation from the body's other systems means that damage accumulates rather than being gradually repaired through the normal processes of biological maintenance. Over decades and centuries, this accumulated damage manifests as memory loss, beginning with the most recent memories and gradually working backwards through the Dreadnought's personal history. The neural interfaces themselves contribute to the problem in ways that are poorly understood even by the tech priests who maintain them. These interfaces, which translate thought into mechanical action and sensory input into neural impulses, place constant strain on the organic nervous system. Every time the Dreadnought moves, every time they perceive their environment, electrical signals flow across the interface between flesh and machine. This constant electrical activity, orders of magnitude greater than what the nervous system would naturally experience, causes degradation at the molecular level. Proteins denature, cell membranes destabilize, and the delicate electrochemical balance that allows neurons to function properly is gradually disrupted. Some tech priests theorize that the problem is not merely biological, but also spiritual in nature. They propose that the machine spirit of the Dreadnought chassis, that semi-conscious entity that dwells within all sufficiently complex machinery, gradually asserts itself over the organic consciousness it was meant to serve. In this view, the memory loss is not simple decay, but a form of displacement, as the machine spirit slowly subsumes the human consciousness, absorbing and transforming it until what remains is neither fully human nor fully machine, but some hybrid entity that cannot properly be classified as either. This theory is controversial and lacks solid supporting evidence, but it persists among certain factions of the Mechanicus who see in the Dreadnought a glimpse of the ultimate fusion of flesh and machine that their faith promises. Whatever the underlying causes, the effects are undeniable and irreversible with current technology. A Dreadnought who has begun to lose their memories will continue to lose them, the process accelerating as the centuries accumulate. There is no cure, no technological intervention that can halt or reverse the degradation. The best that can be done is to slow the process through careful maintenance of the sarcophagus systems, through limiting the duration of each awakening to reduce strain on the organic components, and through extensive record keeping so that even when personal memory fails, objective records remain. But these measures are palliative rather than curative, treating symptoms rather than addressing the underlying condition. They can perhaps extend the period during which the Dreadnought retains meaningful memory and identity, but they cannot prevent the eventual erosion that time brings. Every Dreadnought, no matter how carefully maintained, no matter how attentive their chapter, will eventually reach a point where they can no longer remember who they were or why they continue to fight. They become what their chassis suggests: walking weapons, engines of war with just enough consciousness remaining to follow orders and identify targets, but lacking any deeper connection to personal identity or purpose. Some chapters, when confronted with a Dreadnought who has progressed to this state of near-total amnesia, make the difficult decision to grant them their final rest. A ceremony is held, the ancients' deeds are recited one last time, and the life support systems are gently powered down, allowing the consciousness that has endured for so long to finally slip into true death rather than the half-death of suspended animation. This is considered an act of mercy, a final honor granted to a warrior who has given more than any should be asked to give. The empty chassis is either interred in the chapter's halls of remembrance as a monument to their service, or prepared for a new occupant, continuing its existence with a new consciousness that will, in time, follow the same tragic arc. Other chapters refuse to grant this mercy, viewing the Dreadnought's continued existence as a duty that transcends personal concerns like memory or identity. In these chapters, ancients continue to serve for millennia, even after every trace of their original personality has faded away. They fight when commanded, sleep when ordered, exist in a state that might generously be called minimal consciousness. To observers, they seem more machine than anything else, responding to stimuli with mechanical precision, but displaying no evidence of inner life or subjective experience. Whether any true awareness remains in these ancient shells, whether some small spark of consciousness still flickers in the darkness of their fragmented minds, is a question that perhaps only they could answer, and they no longer possess the capability to do so. The psychological burden of impending memory loss weighs heavily on those dreadnoughts who remain aware enough to perceive what is happening to them. They can feel their minds fraying at the edges, can notice when memories that were once solid become uncertain, can sense the growing gaps in their personal history. This awareness creates a unique form of suffering, a slow drowning in forgetfulness, where the victim remains conscious of their own descent into oblivion. Some dreadnoughts speak of it as a second death, more terrible than the first because it comes gradually rather than all at once, taking pieces of the self one by one, until nothing remains but a hollow shell that still draws power and follows orders. These aware dreadnoughts often make desperate attempts to preserve what they can of themselves before it slips away entirely. They dictate detailed accounts of their memories while they can still access them, creating personal chronicles that record not just events, but feelings, impressions, the subjective experience of a life lived across multiple mortal lifetimes. They request permission to record messages to their future selves, warnings and encouragements, and reminders of who they were when memory still served them. Some compose poetry or music, translating emotion into art, in hopes that when words and memory fail, perhaps aesthetic beauty will still resonate with whatever consciousness remains. One particularly poignant account comes from a Dark Angel's dreadnought known as Brother Ancient Zedakiel, who served his chapter for over 800 years before finally being granted his rest. In his later centuries, as his memory began to fail, Zedakiel maintained a journal that he would read each time he awakened, a chronicle of his service that he continuously updated with his current experiences and thoughts. The journal, preserved in the Dark Angel's archives, reveals a mind struggling to maintain continuity in the face of growing discontinuity. Early entries are detailed and coherent, filled with specific memories and personal reflections. But as the years progress, the entries become shorter and more confused, filled with contradictions and repetitions, as Zedakiel loses track of what he has already recorded. The final entries, written shortly before his systems were shut down for the last time, consist of little more than his name written repeatedly, as if through sheer repetition he could anchor himself to some core identity that kept threatening to slip away entirely. The tragedy of Zedakiel's journal, and of countless similar accounts from other chapters, lies not in the fact of memory loss itself, but in the awareness of that loss. If a dreadnought simply forgot and moved on, unaware of what they had lost, the tragedy would be diminished. But many dreadnoughts remain acutely aware of their deteriorating memories, even as they lose the specific content of those memories. They know they have forgotten, but cannot remember what they have forgotten. They sense the absence of experiences and identities that once defined them, feel the hollow spaces where memories should be, but cannot access the memories themselves. This creates a state of perpetual loss, a grief that cannot be resolved because what is grieved for cannot even be clearly identified. Chapter librarians, those space marines who possess psychic abilities and often serve as counselors and spiritual guides, have attempted to help dreadnoughts cope with this existential crisis. Some librarians use their psychic powers to probe the fragmenting memories of failing dreadnoughts, attempting to recover and record memories before they fade completely. Others work to help the dreadnought accept their situation, providing philosophical frameworks that might ease the psychological burden of knowing they are losing themselves. The librarians of the Blood Ravens chapter, known for their scholarly inclinations, have developed extensive therapeutic protocols specifically for dreadnoughts experiencing memory loss, combining psychic techniques with traditional counseling methods in hopes of preserving as much of the original personality as possible. But even the most skilled librarian cannot halt the inevitable progression of decay. They can perhaps help the dreadnought find meaning in an existence increasingly stripped of personal context, can offer comfort in the face of impending dissolution, but they cannot prevent the dissolution itself. The organic brain, once damaged beyond a certain threshold, cannot be restored through psychic intervention any more than through technological means. The best that can be achieved is to help the dreadnought make peace with their fate, to find some measure of acceptance in the face of an ending that comes not as sudden death but as gradual fading. Interestingly, some chapters have observed that dreadnoughts with strong faith seem to maintain their memories and identities longer than those without such spiritual anchors. Chaplains attribute this to the power of the Emperor's blessing, suggesting that those who maintain their devotion and remain active in their spiritual lives receive divine protection against the ravages of time and forgetfulness. Skeptics within the Mechanicus propose more prosaic explanations that regular engagement with familiar rituals and prayers provides cognitive stimulation that helps maintain neural pathways, or that the psychological comfort provided by faith reduces stress on the organic systems. Whatever the explanation, the correlation has been observed across multiple chapters and different dreadnought patterns, leading many chapter masters to ensure their ancients receive regular spiritual ministrations from chaplains as part of their maintenance protocols. The dreams of dreadnoughts, on those rare occasions when their suspended consciousness dips into something resembling natural sleep, offer another window into the experience of progressive memory loss. Several dreadnoughts have reported experiencing dreams in which they perceive themselves as they once were flesh and blood warriors with intact bodies and clear memories. In these dreams, they walk battlefields long since turned to dust, speak with brothers centuries dead, relive moments from a past that grows more distant with each awakening. But increasingly, these dreams become confused and fragmentary, mixing memories from different eras, combining faces and names in impossible ways, creating chimeric experiences that never actually occurred but feel emotionally true. Some tech priests theorize that these dreams represent the brain's attempts to maintain coherence in the face of deteriorating neural architecture, creating false memories to fill the gaps left by true memories that have faded. Others suggest the dreams might be genuine glimpses into past lives, accessing memories that conscious thought can no longer reach. The dreadnoughts themselves often cannot distinguish between true memory and dream-generated fiction, adding another layer of uncertainty to already fragmented identities. They wake from these dreams even more confused than before, unable to sort reality from imagination, authentic experience from constructed narrative. The social dynamics within chapters are profoundly affected by the presence of dreadnoughts suffering from significant memory loss. Younger space marines, who were perhaps not even born when the ancient was last awake, must learn to interact respectfully with a warrior who might not remember previous interactions, who might ask the same questions repeatedly, who might confuse them with long-dead battle brothers. This requires patience and understanding that not all chapters cultivate. In some chapters, dreadnoughts become isolated figures, awakened only when their tactical knowledge is needed, then return to sleep without much personal interaction. In others, the dreadnoughts remain integrated into chapter life as much as possible, with specific protocols developed to help bridge the gaps in their memory and maintain social connections despite the challenges. The Salamanders chapter, known for their compassion and their emphasis on maintaining connections to their mortal origins, have developed particularly sophisticated approaches to helping dreadnoughts cope with memory loss. They assign each ancient a remembrancer, a battle brother whose specific duty is to maintain the ancient's personal history, to serve as a living memory when the ancient's own memory fails. This remembrancer studies the ancient's history in exhaustive detail, commits to memory the names and faces of everyone the ancient has known, learns the specific details of every battle and campaign. When the ancient awakens, the remembrancer is there to provide personal rather than merely tactical context, to speak of shared experiences and fallen comrades, to help the ancient reconnect with their own identity. This approach has proven remarkably effective in maintaining dreadnought stability and coherence over extended periods. Salamander's dreadnoughts, even those who have served for many centuries, tend to retain stronger connections to their personal identities than dreadnoughts in chapters without such support systems. But even this approach has its limitations. The remembrancer themselves is mortal in Space Marine terms, capable of service spanning perhaps 3 or 4 centuries before age and injury claim them. When a remembrancer dies or can no longer serve, their duties must be passed to another, requiring the transfer of vast amounts of personal knowledge and the establishment of new relationships. Each such transition is traumatic for the dreadnought, as the face and voice that had become their anchor to identity is replaced by someone new, someone who knows the facts but lacks the lived experience of shared service. The Dark Angels and their successor chapters face unique challenges with their dreadnoughts due to the secrets they carry. The inner circle, those dark angels who know the chapter's great shame and its ongoing hunt for the fallen, must carefully manage which dreadnoughts can be trusted with this knowledge. Some ancients are brought into the inner circle and carry the burden of these secrets across centuries. But as their memories begin to fail, the question arises, what happens when a dreadnought, who knows the chapter's darkest secrets, can no longer reliably remember what they should not speak of? The Dark Angels have developed specific protocols for managing this situation, including careful monitoring of failing dreadnoughts and, in extreme cases, permanent suspension of ancients whose memory loss has progressed to the point where they might inadvertently reveal secrets that must be kept. This creates its own tragedy, as Dark Angels dreadnoughts who have served faithfully for centuries find themselves isolated and effectively imprisoned because their failing memories make them security risks. They fought and bled for their chapter, endured the horror of entombment and the slow decay of identity, only to be punished in their final years for the natural consequences of that decay. Some of these isolated ancients understand what is happening and why, accepting their fate with the stoic duty that characterizes the Dark Angels. Others, too far gone to grasp the full situation, experience only confusion and a sense of abandonment, wondering why they have been sealed away when they can still fight, still serve, still contribute to the Emperor's work. The Iron Hands chapter, with their particular reverence for the machine and their drive to replace weak flesh with strong steel, might seem better positioned than most to handle dreadnoughts and their memory issues. After all, the chapter's philosophy holds that flesh is inherently fallible and that perfection comes through embracing the machine. Yet even the Iron Hands cannot escape the fundamental problem. The core of consciousness that makes a dreadnought more than a simple war machine is irreducibly biological, and that biological component brings with it all the weaknesses and limitations of flesh. Iron Hands dreadnoughts are maintained with exceptional technical precision, their sarcophagi equipped with the most advanced life support systems available, their neural interfaces carefully calibrated and constantly monitored. But all the technical excellence in the galaxy cannot prevent the gradual degradation of biological neurons over centuries of existence. Some Iron Hands dreadnoughts, confronted with the reality of their failing organic memories, have attempted to solve the problem through further mechanization. They request that tech marines augment their neural interfaces, adding additional machine memory systems and creating more extensive connections between organic brain and electronic storage. The hope is that by offloading more cognitive functions to machine systems, they can preserve some form of continuity, even as their biological memories fade. These experiments have produced mixed results. The additional augmentation can indeed preserve tactical knowledge and factual information, but it cannot preserve the subjective experience and emotional content that gives memories their personal significance. The resulting dreadnoughts sometimes describe feeling even more disconnected from their original identities, as if they have become observers watching their own lives through the cold filter of machine logic. The question of when to grant a failing dreadnought their final rest is one of the most difficult decisions a chapter must make. On one hand, the dreadnought represents an investment of scarce resources and irreplaceable expertise. Every battle they fight, every piece of tactical advice they offer, every mere presence that inspires nearby battle brothers to greater acts of valor, these contributions have immense value to the chapter's ongoing success. On the other hand, there comes a point where continued service becomes a form of torture, where the warrior who was honored with entombment has been reduced to something that can barely be called conscious, let alone human. Finding the balance between honoring the dreadnaught's service and respecting their dignity becomes increasingly difficult as memory loss progresses. Different chapters draw this line in different places, reflecting their varying philosophies and values. The Blood Angels, with their understanding of the curses that can afflict the mind, tend to be more willing to grant final rest to dreadnoughts whose personalities have significantly deteriorated. They view forced continuation in such a state as disrespectful to the warrior's memory and sacrifice. The Imperial Fists, with their emphasis on stoic duty above all else, are more likely to keep dreadnoughts in service as long as they remain tactically functional, viewing memory loss as unfortunate but not sufficient reason to end a career of service. The Space Wolves, as mentioned earlier, go to great lengths to preserve their ancients, but will grant them final rest if requested, honoring the ancients' own choice in the matter when they remain capable of making such choices. This decision becomes even more complex when the Dreadnought themselves expresses a preference. Some ancients, aware of their deteriorating condition, request to be allowed to die rather than continue fading into mechanical automata. They have seen what they are becoming, understand that the person they once were is being slowly erased, and prefer to end their existence while some fragment of their original identity remains. Other Dreadnoughts desperately resist the idea of final rest, clinging to continued existence even as that existence becomes increasingly hollow. They fear the void of true death more than the confused half-life they currently endure. Or perhaps they cannot face the idea that their service might finally be complete, that they might be allowed to lay down their burden after so many centuries of carrying it. Chapter leadership must weigh these preferences against practical and spiritual considerations. If a Dreadnought wishes to continue serving, but has deteriorated to the point where they pose risks to themselves or others, should their wishes be honored or overridden? If an ancient requests death while still capable of meaningful service, is granting that request an act of mercy or a waste of valuable resources? There are no easy answers to these questions, and different chapter masters have made different decisions that haunt them in the long watches of the night. The broader Imperium largely ignores the tragedy of Dreadnought memory loss, viewing it as either irrelevant or inevitable. To the Administratum officials who track military resources across the galaxy, a Dreadnought is simply a unit designation with certain tactical capabilities. Whether the consciousness within that Dreadnought remembers its own name is immaterial to whether it can be deployed effectively against the Emperor's enemies. To the common Imperial citizen, who might see a Dreadnought striding into battle, these walking war machines are terrifying and awe-inspiring avatars of the Emperor's power, but their internal struggles and degrading memories are unknown and unknowable. Only within the chapters themselves, among the battle brothers who know the ancients as individuals rather than weapons, does the tragedy receive the recognition it deserves. Some Imperial scholars and philosophers, aware of the Dreadnought phenomenon, have debated what it reveals about the nature of consciousness and identity. If a being loses all memory of their past, can they still be considered the same person? If the original personality has completely eroded, is the consciousness that remains still deserving of the honors and recognition earned by the person they used to be? These abstract questions have concrete implications for how Dreadnoughts are treated and understood, but they remain largely unresolved. The Imperium is not particularly interested in philosophical nuance when pragmatic concerns of survival and military necessity demand attention. There are occasional rumors of Dreadnoughts who have somehow transcended the limitations of their condition, who have served for millennia while retaining perfect clarity of mind and memory. These stories circulate among Space Marine chapters, tales of legendary ancients who never forget, who can recall every battle and every fallen brother with perfect fidelity. Most of these stories are likely apocryphal, wishful thinking about what might be possible rather than accurate reports of what actually exists. But perhaps, in the vast galaxy with its countless chapters and their varied approaches to Dreadnought maintenance, there exist a few examples of ancients who have genuinely overcome the usual trajectory of memory loss. If so, they would be treasures beyond price, not just for their tactical value, but for what they might reveal about the limits of consciousness and the possibility of preserving identity across truly vast stretches of time. The Dreadnought pattern itself has evolved over the millennia, with newer marks incorporating lessons learned from observing the effects of long-term consciousness entombment. Modern Dreadnought designs include more sophisticated life support systems, better neural interface technology, and more extensive machine memory banks to supplement failing organic memory. But these improvements are incremental rather than revolutionary. They might extend the period of clear consciousness by decades or even a century, but they cannot indefinitely prevent the biological degradation that centuries of existence inevitably bring. The fundamental problem that a biological brain was never meant to exist in the manner demanded by Dreadnought service remains unsolved and perhaps unsolvable with current technology. Some Mechanicus Magos, those who study the intersection of flesh and machine with religious fervor, believe that future advances might finally resolve the Dreadnought memory problem. They speak of theoretical technologies that could completely digitize consciousness, transferring the organic mind into pure machine format, where degradation would no longer be a concern. But such technology, if it even exists, would cross theological and philosophical lines that many chapters would refuse to cross. A Dreadnought, no matter how much they have been transformed, retains some organic core, some link to the flesh that all Space Marines began as. Complete digitization would sever that link entirely, creating something that could no longer claim to be human in any meaningful sense. Most chapters would view such a transformation as a step too far, a rejection of the Emperor's design that borders on heresy. The legacy of each Dreadnought, regardless of how their service ends, contributes to chapter identity and tradition in ways that extend far beyond their tactical contributions. When a Dreadnought finally takes their rest, when the last connection between consciousness and machine is severed and true death comes at last, chapters hold elaborate funeral rites that honor not just the warrior's final years of service, but their entire existence, from recruitment through entombment and beyond. These rites serve multiple purposes. They provide closure for the battle brothers who served alongside the Ancient. They reinforce chapter values and traditions. And they ensure that even though the Dreadnought's own memory failed, the chapter's memory of them will not. The empty sarcophagi of fallen Dreadnoughts are treated with reverence, often displayed in chapter halls of remembrance, as monuments to service and sacrifice. Some chapters inscribe the names of every battle the Ancient fought upon the chassis, creating a physical record that outlasts the organic memory that once resided within. Others preserve personal effects and recordings, maintaining archives that future generations can access to learn about heroes who shaped the chapter's history. These practices ensure that even when the warrior themselves forgot who they were, their chapter never forgets. Perhaps the most profound lesson from the tragedy of Dreadnought memory loss is what it reveals about the nature of identity and the importance of memory in maintaining selfhood. We are, in large part, the sum of our memories and experiences. When those memories fade, when the connections to our past become tenuous or severed entirely, something essential is lost even if biological existence continues. The Dreadnoughts, in their slow fade into forgetfulness, demonstrate that mere consciousness is not sufficient for personhood, that identity requires continuity, and that a life extended indefinitely might become a burden rather than a blessing if that extension comes at the cost of everything that made the life worth living. The Space Marines who are offered entombment, those warriors who have suffered injuries that would kill even their enhanced biology, face an impossible choice in their final moments of flesh and blood existence. They can accept death with honor, knowing they will be remembered for what they achieved and understanding that their watch has ended. Or they can accept entombment and the chance to continue serving the Emperor for centuries or millennia to come, knowing that this extended service comes with the near certainty that they will eventually lose themselves, that the person they are will slowly fade until nothing remains but a weapon that once bore their name. Different warriors make different choices based on their values, their faith, their understanding of duty, and perhaps their fear or acceptance of death. What cannot be known at the moment of that choice is exactly how the trajectory will unfold, how quickly memory will fade, how much of the original personality will survive the centuries, how it will feel when awareness of self becomes uncertain and identity becomes questionable. The chapter's apothecaries and chaplains who present the choice do their best to explain what entombment means, but words are insufficient to convey the reality of an existence so removed from normal human experience. Those who accept entombment do so based on incomplete information, trusting that the honor and opportunity for continued service outweigh whatever suffering might come. Many discover, across the long years of their extended existence, that the price was higher than they understood when they made their choice. Yet despite everything, despite the memory loss, despite the isolation, despite the slow erosion of identity and the confusion of waking in centuries, not their own, many Dreadnoughts speak of their service as meaningful and worthwhile. Even those who can no longer remember most of their past, who struggle to maintain coherent thoughts and clear sense of self, often express pride in continuing to fight for the Emperor and their chapter. Perhaps this represents genuine satisfaction with their lot, a true belief that continued service justifies any personal cost. Or perhaps it reflects conditioning so deep that even the most profound amnesia cannot shake it, values so thoroughly imprinted that they persist even when the memories that originally supported them have faded to nothing. As we consider the tragedy of a dreadnought losing their memory, it's important to remember that this fate awaits not just one or two unfortunate individuals, but rather represents the eventual destiny of nearly every ancient who serves long enough. Given sufficient time, every dreadnought will experience some degree of memory loss, some confusion about identity, some disconnection from the person they once were. This is not a rare malfunction or an avoidable tragedy, but an inherent feature of the dreadnought existence, as fundamental to their nature as their towering size or devastating firepower. The Imperium has chosen to preserve its greatest warriors through a technology that prolongs existence, but cannot preserve the psychological continuity that makes that existence meaningful. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, the dreadnoughts stand as monuments to both the Imperium's greatness and its cruelty. They represent humanity's refusal to accept the natural limits of mortal existence, its determination to preserve and deploy every possible asset in the endless war for survival. But they also represent the cost of that refusal, the price paid when existence is valued over experience, when tactical capability takes precedence over personal dignity, when warriors are honored with a fate that some might consider worse than the death they have been denied. The dreadnoughts march to war bearing names they struggle to remember, fighting for reasons that have faded to vague impressions. Serving an emperor they can no longer clearly recall choosing to follow, and they will continue this service until finally, mercifully, the last spark of consciousness flickers and dies, granting them the peace that should have been theirs centuries ago. The next time you see artwork or read accounts of a dreadnought striding into battle, weapons blazing and armor gleaming with centuries of campaign honors, remember that within that walking fortress of ceramite and adamantium struggles a consciousness that may no longer remember its own name. Remember that the towering war machine that inspires such awe and fear might contain a warrior who wakes from each sleep, wondering where they are, who they are, and why they continue to fight. Remember that the price of the dreadnought's immortality is paid not just once during the agony of entombment, but again and again with each memory that slips away, each piece of identity that erodes, each connection to their past that becomes irrevocably severed. In understanding this tragedy, we gain deeper appreciation for the sacrifice these warriors have made, not just the sacrifice of their bodies, but the far more profound sacrifice of their very selves, given piece by piece across the centuries in service to an Imperium that will never fully understand what it has asked of them. If you found this exploration of one of the grimdark universe's most tragic and overlooked fates both fascinating and sobering, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Your support helps us continue diving deep into the lore and stories that make Warhammer 40K such a rich and compelling setting, allowing us to explore not just the grand battles and heroic sacrifices, but also the quieter tragedies that exist in the shadows of the Imperium's endless wars. Until next time, remember that in the darkness of the far future, the greatest horrors are not always the Xenos threats or the demonic incursions, but sometimes the price we pay to fight against them, the sacrifices made by warriors who give not just their lives but their very selves, piece by piece, memory by memory, until nothing remains but a weapon that once bore a human name. The dreadnoughts will continue their service across the galaxy, waking when needed, fighting with ancient skill, sleeping again when their duty is done. Some will retain their memories and identities for centuries, blessed by careful maintenance and shorter sleep cycles. Others will fade more quickly, their organic minds succumbing to the inevitable degradation that comes from existing in a form that defies nature's design. But all of them, every single ancient who has been granted this dubious honor, carry with them the same fundamental tragedy. They are warriors who wanted nothing more than to serve the Emperor and their chapter, who accepted transformation into living weapons in order to continue that service, and who find in that service a slow death of the self that is in many ways crueler than the quick death they were denied. Their sacrifice deserves to be remembered, even when they themselves can no longer remember making it. In understanding the tragedy of Dreadnought memory loss, we gain insight into the broader themes that make Warhammer 40K such a compelling and sobering fictional universe. It is a setting where the imperative of survival has led humanity to accept compromises that would be unthinkable in gentler times, where the preservation of strategic assets takes precedence over individual dignity, where warriors are honored with fates that might be considered punishment in any other context. The Dreadnoughts embody these contradictions. They are the most honored of the honored, yet they suffer in ways that are uniquely terrible. They are granted immortality, yet they lose everything that makes immortal existence meaningful. They are preserved, so they can continue serving. Yet the service gradually destroys the very consciousness it was meant to preserve. In their stories, we see reflected the grimdark nature of the entire setting, where even the greatest honors come with prices that perhaps should never be paid, where salvation and damnation have become impossible to distinguish, where the line between hero and victim has been erased entirely. The next time you see a dreadnought in artwork or read about one in the lore, remember that within that imposing chassis may dwell a consciousness that no longer knows its own name, that fights for reasons it can no longer recall, that serves an emperor it cannot remember choosing to follow. Remember and honor the sacrifice that is so profound it continues long after the warrior who made it has forgotten they ever made it at all.
I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys are sleepy. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to comment, give me feedback. And yeah, love you guys.